All right. Hi, good evening. I'm Rabbi Rachel Greengrass. It's so nice to have you all here with us. When we first went down into lockdown, um, a lot of us were feeling very desperate for ways to continue to connect and to continue to make the world a better place. And while we are still in most ways isolating from one another, one of the gifts of this time period has been reconnecting to nature, going outside and really getting to be one with the world. Right during the first few weeks of COVID, I actually planted finally my organic garden in my own yard instead of just in the temple. And I put together this large composter that we've already like gone through 3 cycles with it now. And and it's been a real gift to be able to have time to reconnect and to do things that are good for the planet. That being said, we are on this Friday celebrating Rosh Hashanah, which is the birthday of the planet. And the first thing we're taught in the creation story is that we are created in order to take care of God's creation. In Midrash Genesis Rabbah, it actually pictures God raising Adam in God's hand and saying, "Look at all of my creation, see what I have created. It's up to you to take care of it, for if you don't, then no one after you will be able to." And I really think in this moment, we are seeing the reality of that midrash, which was written 2,000 years ago, with the devastation in Louisiana of the hurricane, on the West Coast in California and in Oregon, with the worst pollution in the world because of these wildfires, or the worst air quality. We certainly are needing to double down on what it means to take care of the world and what it means to live in a sustainable way. So at the beginning of our COVID break from coming together in person, the chair of our Tikkun Olam committee, Shelley Jacoby, said, "I found this amazing woman who does all of this work about sustainability." And so I am so excited for us to have the opportunity in preparation for the high holidays and really making a commitment to take better care of the planet, to invite Carrie C., who is an artist, a social justice advocate, a permaculture practitioner, former librarian, and founder of Zero Waste Miami. She has degrees in painting, photography, and library and information science from the University of California, Santa Cruz and San Jose State University. She's worked at San Francisco MoMA, San Francisco School of Arts, University of Miami as a private researcher. And she is originally from Southern California, but has made her home right here in Miami for the past 13 years. So that means we've been here almost the same amount of time. And yet this is my first time getting to learn from her. So I'm very excited. Carrie founded Zero Waste Miami in 2018 in conjunction with an art exhibition at the Bernice Steinbaum Gallery, which focused on raising awareness of climate justice in South Florida. Knowing that many people would want to make a difference and realizing how difficult and time-consuming it can be to find environmentally responsible products, she launched ZWM, a local resources website, followed by skill sharing workshops, informational seminars, and consulting services. So Carrie, it is my pleasure to invite you to share some of your wealth of knowledge with our Betham community.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Rabbi, for that introduction, and to Shelley and to the committees that took the time to put together this event. I'm so glad that there are so many of you that think that this is important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen so that I can show you the presentation that I would give if we were actually in the room together. And think that you'll still be able to see me talking while I do that. Let's see, that's not the right thing. Excuse me for just a minute.
And while Carrie is pulling up this presentation, just so you know, she has told us that throughout the presentation, if you do have questions, you can go ahead and raise your hand or write something in the chat, and we will get to it at an opportune time. There will be also time at the end for questions.
Right, and I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here, but it shouldn't take much longer. We've got my computer mouse decided yesterday to quit on me, so I'm borrowing one. And it's not what I'm used to. Hang on just a second here. Okay, I think this should do it. Okay, so can everybody see the?
Yes, that looks great.
All right, great. Okay, so I want to start just briefly, even though I assume that everybody is here because you do think that this is important, but sometimes I think it's helpful to have a little bit more understanding of why it's important, because it then helps us move forward with doing something about it. So we, of course, have an interest in keeping our own immediate environments and neighborhoods and cities clean and healthy. And it's easy to notice when something is going wrong and to correct the problem. But what's harder to notice, though, is when something is going wrong elsewhere, and how we might be contributing to environmental injustice that occurs in other neighborhoods, other cities, other countries. It's been shown that the wealthiest countries produce the most waste, and it's the poorest countries that experience the most negative impact from that waste and that pollution. And that is the case also on a micro level within our own country and within our own states and cities. The pollutions and emissions and use of non-renewable resources that come out of our consumer choices lead to or contribute to all of these problems: climate change, ecosystem disruption, and so forth. Those then, as we've seen, give rise to things like horrible pandemics, contaminated soil and air and water, and in some places, even food insecurity. Then that can result in individuals and communities experiencing chronic disease and poor health, housing instability, and political and economic instability. And because people who are experiencing these hardships have less choice in their own lives, they then it then becomes a cycle, and they are less able to make their own positive choices for the environment. So even when we know this, it can be hard to know where to start or what to do. And we want to know, well, what are the worst things? Let's start there. So we can kind of do this. I'm going to go over the worst offenders and kind of break it down for you so that we can think more clearly about what you can do at home and in your own personal choices where you can have the most impact. this is one of the big ones. And before I start with these worst 5, I want to say, so measuring the responsibility for carbon emissions and methane emissions and water pollution and air pollution is complicated, and it's done by a lot of different people. It's done by governments and organizations, and nobody totally agrees on how that should necessarily be done, what should be included, how, so we have often confusion that's caused by inconsistent data. Somebody says, oh, somebody told me that this is the most polluting things. I heard it over here that this is the other polluting thing. And then it's kind of hard to know what to believe. It doesn't mean that any of it is necessarily not true. It just means that people are measuring things in different ways. And oftentimes the people who are measuring don't even share their data or share how they came to their conclusions, which makes it hard to then come to just one consensus. But what we do know is that everybody basically agrees that you can break it down into pretty much 5 basic bad categories, which are energy production, most of which still comes from coal and natural gas, transportation, much of which is from cars and light-duty vehicles, industry, which includes basically everything that we make, and then energy use, residential energy use, commercial energy use, institutional energy use, and agriculture, and specifically industrial agriculture, which is factory farming and really intensive farming with lots of chemical inputs, not the idyllic little farm on a hill that we would like to think of. So it's easy to kind of get into the weeds with these bigger categories and argue about how to pick out the most important data. But so what I'm going to do is break it down further and talk about just the worst ones at home. So you've got non-renewable energy still. This one is actually a relatively easy thing to address, which is getting solar panels on your house. It is expensive, and you don't see the savings for a number of years, but it's one thing you can do to make a big impact. Then there's personal fuel use and travel. This is something that's easy to do right now because we're all shut up at home, but once restrictions are lifted and people are able to travel more, if you cut down on your air travel, if you are able to cut down on your commute, or even just the number of errands that you run in a day, you can be making a bit of a difference. Consumer waste is a really huge one. And so I'm gonna kind of skip over that for now and go into it more in the next slide. The next big one at home is AC use. This is a huge problem environmentally, globally, and it's just getting worse and worse. So one small thing you can do to make a difference is to just turn your thermostat to a higher temperature when you're out of the house. And a bigger thing, a more impactful change, is to do home improvements that actually reduce the need for air conditioning. Some of the things you can do are, it ranges from putting more insulation in your attic to installing a solar exhaust fan in your attic, making sure that you don't have any small air leaks here and there. You can have someone check that for you. And You can also do a Florida-friendly landscaping that will shade the right parts of your house at the right time of day, so that your AC doesn't have to work as hard. And then this is one that I don't think most people really want to know, but it is an unavoidable fact, which is that beef and dairy are the most high carbon foods. And the more that we eat beef and dairy, the more negative impact we have, especially if we're eating that from factory farmed beef. Sheep and poultry products are also not so great, but pretty much everybody agrees on the fact that beef and dairy are the worst. So you can have the most impact by just eliminating those from your diet. I know that that's something that most people aren't willing or even able to do necessarily. So the next best thing is to make sure that you buy those products. First, look for them locally. And we do actually have some local sources from farmers that are using more sustainable practices. You want to look for mention of grass-fed and grass-finished. And I'm going to talk later about how to figure out whether a company or a farm is using environmental terms realistically, or whether they're doing what's called greenwashing, making it seem like they're doing more than they are. And I'll get more into food choices later. All right, so for my purposes, I'm going to break down consumer waste into these three categories and pick out the worst things that we can focus on to change as being the chemical fertilizers and pesticides that get used in a home landscape, the pollution and waste that is often at the source of the textiles and the clothing that we buy, and the use of single-use and especially non-recyclable plastics. All right, so how can we help? First, I think it's important to acknowledge that eco-anxiety is a real thing for a lot of people. Especially the more that you learn about the devastating effects on our and others' environments, the more you really want to do something, but you get caught up in feeling like, oh, I have to do it all, but I can't do any of it, and it can be a little paralyzing. So I just want to say, as I kind of bombard you with information tonight, to just remember that nobody expects you to go out and change everything about your consumer habits tomorrow immediately. That I'm going to give you a lot of ideas and options and information, and it's actually, I think, most effective if you just start with whatever feels easiest for you and then build on that as you can. All right, so for a long time now, we've been hearing the slogan, reduce, reuse, recycle. It was especially big in the 70s and 80s, I think. And it was originally it was intended that those actions be taken in that order. So first, reduce the amount of stuff that you use, the polluting things that you might be buying, then find a way to reuse it. And then if you have stuff left over, then recycle it. But in the decades since that slogan started going around, most of the focus has been on recycling, which is important. And I'm going to talk at length about it, but the others are also important. So then I'm going to kind of come back and revisit those. Recycling alone is not going to solve our problems. But it's vastly better than throwing it all in a landfill or into an incinerator. So we should still do it while we have things that can be recycled. There are 3 basic ways you can recycle things. One is through municipal recycling in your curbside bins, obviously, but those are actually pretty limited in what you can put in there. So then you have mail-in programs, and you have drop-off and pickup programs, which are similar to the mail-in programs, but they can take things that are heavier or bulkier. All right, so, oh, is someone raising their hand? No.
Are you going to talk about what the mail-in
Yes.
recycling is? Okay, great.
Yes. I want to make sure first that everybody's on the same page about what to put and not put in your bins. All right, so all that Miami-Dade will take is narrow neck plastic bottles. So water bottles, laundry detergent bottles, soda bottles, things like that. And those are almost always number 1 and 2 plastics. You can put in clean cardboard and paper, and you can put in milk cartons and, you know, the aseptic boxes that you can buy, you know, vegetable broth in and that sort of thing. Cans and glass bottles, and that's it. So that means no pizza boxes, no plastic clamshells, no wire hangers, even though you might have something that is made of a technically recyclable material, if you can't actually put it into your bin. All right, and while we're thinking about recycling, it's important to remember too that it does have limitations. Even the plastics that can be recycled can only be recycled a few times because plastic degrades every time that it's recycled. Every time that it's recycled, it's made into something that requires a less pure plastic. Once it reaches the end of its life there, it's much more difficult to break it down again and make it into anything else. Paper is a little bit better, but it also has an end of life. By the time it gets to a paper napkin, for example, that's pretty much it. You can't do anything else with it. It's only glass and metal that can be put in over and over and over again. All right, so it also helps, I think, to know what all of those numbers mean. If you can't recycle them all, why do they have a recycling symbol on them? And how do you interpret the numbers? So the 1s and the 2s are what you can put in your curbside bins. The 4s and the 5s are what you usually can mail in to the mail-in programs. And I'm going to go through each one briefly. The 1s are one of the most common plastics. It's what you find in the disposable water bottles and all kinds of other stuff. They're really better avoided if you can. They are absolutely meant only for a single use, and it's known that they leach carcinogens if they get too hot for too long. They really are super common, but it's better to find something else if you can. The only reason that they're not totally terrible is that they really are easy to recycle. Number 2 is actually one of the better plastics. If you're going to buy plastic, this is the one that you should go with because it's known to be food safe, and it's easy to recycle. Was there another question? No, okay. All right, this is arguably the worst one, and it's in almost everything. It's known to leach all kinds of harmful chemicals. In order to make it, large amounts of chlorine have to be stored, which is a hazard for multiple reasons. And it's almost impossible to find somebody who can and will recycle it. So if you can avoid it, this is the best one to avoid. 4 is another that's not so bad. You can recycle this. Usually this is what you find in plastic grocery bags, and you can recycle them usually out in front of Publix. This one I'm kind of on the fence about. It's food safe. It doesn't leach anything as terrible as some of the others, but it is harder to recycle. And one thing that you can do is just take a minute to go out of your way to ask the owner or the manager of the grocery store where you shop if they would consider carrying the products that come in number 5 plastic from a company that uses glass instead. And in the meantime, I'm going to go in later to some of the mail-in programs that you can use for those. This is another bad one. This is styrofoam. Also practically impossible to recycle and unhealthy and used in a lot of stuff. If you, in addition to just avoiding this one, again, you can make your voice heard as a consumer literally just by taking the time to talk to somebody in a store or call a company and ask them if they'll use something else instead. Especially ask them if they will use municipally recyclable materials or home compostable packing materials. And then number 7 is absolutely everything else, which is a lot of different things. But we're seeing it more and more as in bioplastics. So those bioplastics are usually what's called PLA, at least the ones that you find in cups like this, that a lot of people are buying and using, wanting to do something better for the environment. But unfortunately, they're right now still really not great. They're not recyclable. And the only way that they are biodegradable or compostable is if you can send them to an industrial composting facility, which we don't have. So it's better to just avoid them until scientists come up with something better. All right, so let's see. Oh, and excuse me, just a moment. I'm going to go back to styrofoam because I forgot to tell you one thing, which is that this is also, you probably noticed, common in some takeout containers. And so another thing you can do is if maybe you're not going to many restaurants right now, but if you are, and when you go back to that, bring your own takeout container. That doesn't mean that you have to show up with like an empty yogurt tub and feel like the weirdest person in the place. There are actually a lot of really nice stainless steel or glass containers that you can buy. For example, like this. It's like a little lunchbox, and then you avoid the issue of takeout containers at all. All right. So for things that are more complicated and harder to recycle, I'll be sending out a list to everybody who registered of all of these things. So if you can't take notes fast enough, don't worry, you can get this all later. But both Apple and Dell have take-back programs for electronics. Whole Foods does cell phones only, and Goodwill will, the last I checked, take both working and non-working electronics as well. Right now, the only place I know that will take appliances is Best Buy. But one thing you can do is to advocate for our government to become RAD partners, which is a program that the EPA does in partnership with municipalities and organizations, specifically for taking back appliances. For furniture, these are the two places I recommend the most for donations, because they both do social justice work as well, Lotus House and Out of the Closet. And they both do pickups also, if you have enough and if you contact them ahead of time. Jeans, and some places will take almost any clothing in whatever condition and find a way to recycle it. There are more than these also, and if you're interested in this, reach out later and I can give you even more options. There are also take-back programs for cosmetics. Some of them are brand specific and some are not. And this one, Wands for Wildlife, specifically collects used mascara wands for a wildlife rehabilitation center. All right, and then you can also even recycle baby carriers, shoes, and there's a company called TerraCycle that is you have to pay just for the box that they'll send you to fill, and then you have to pay to send it back. But they will recycle almost anything. And if you go to their website, you can scroll through and see the many, many, many different programs that they have, both for specific brand packaging recycling and for more general things like K-cups and sports balls, and I think they have one box where you can literally put in almost anything. Speaking of K-cups, if you use an Nespresso machine, you can drop off your cleaned coffee pods at Williams-Sonoma or at Macy's. And while we're talking about K-cups, this is another place where if you use them, you can potentially make a big difference, because they are extremely wasteful and convenient, but they require a lot of energy and resources to produce. And at this point, I think the number of K-cups that have been sent to landfills could wrap around the earth 10 times. So let's see. Coffee is a really high carbon product. It's actually up there with beef and dairy and other meats. And the global demand for it has led to deforestation and farming practices that degrade the soil and contribute to habitat loss, crop failures, extreme poverty, and then that incentivizes further deforestation and, like I mentioned before, contributes to really bad economic and social problems. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that making changes in your coffee habits is something that actually can make a big difference. So if you use K-cups but you're open to trying a different way of making your coffee, you can you can use a pour over and use a reusable washable cloth filter. or you can use a French press. And there are a lot of places where you can buy really nice, lovely French presses that you will enjoy using. There's also a local ceramicist, Gerbi Tiskerskaya, who makes beautiful pour-overs that are almost a work of art in and of themselves. If you are not willing to give up your K-cups, you can try buying reusable ones. You can actually refill, get a refillable K-cup from, there's a website called earthcider.com, or you can also buy them directly from certain coffee pod manufacturers. And whichever way that you're preparing the coffee, one of the best things you can do is make sure that you're buying sustainably grown varieties. So the first thing to look for is the bird-friendly certification. This is the most rigorous certification that coffee can receive. And it helps to, you can go to the website and find a list. You can also ask, because not every company that is certified displays the label on their packaging. If they don't have that, then USDA Organic is also helpful. And Rainforest Alliance certified also tells you that at least some sustainable practices were being used. You can also look for whether or not the coffee was shade grown, which is the more sustainable way. But know that some companies use that term misleadingly, so it always helps to double check. And if you buy from small specialty roasters, you're more likely to be buying from somebody who is using responsible practices. Another hint is if they are able to give you really specific information about where the coffee was grown and specifically even what farms or co-ops that they're working with. The companies that take the time to do that are more likely to be actually walking the walk. And then the last thing to know about coffee is that you really do get what you pay for. You can't get cheap and sustainably grown coffee. All right. And I think that's a good segue into chocolate, which is another high carbon food that also has a lot of social justice issues wrapped up in it. So most chocolate is grown and harvested by people who are living in such extreme poverty that they may not ever even see a chocolate bar. Child labor and slavery are common, and the big companies that make chocolate know this, and they've done very little to address it or to try to make a change. These are some of the companies that are considered slavery-free chocolate. There are a lot of others actually, but they're usually pretty small brands, and it can take some time to seek them out. So if you want to support companies that are dedicated to eliminating slavery and child labor in chocolate production, the first place to go is slavefreechocolate.com. They have a list. You can check to see if the brands you like are on the list. And if you are in the grocery and happen to be, wanting to know if the thing in front of you was ethically produced, look for Fair Trade Certified, which almost always means that it is also slavery-free. You can also look for USDA Organic and Rainforest Alliance. There's also UTZ, which is partnered with Rainforest Alliance. All of these certifications mean slightly different things, but they all are good indicators that the company is at least doing something right. All right, so now let's go back up to the reuse part of that slogan. The longer you make something last, the more positive impact you have. You can make it last by repairing it or by donating it. The more that somebody buys secondhand items, the lesser the demand for new products that require extensive energy use and that pollute waterways and air. I think that this is all probably pretty straightforward. You can easily look for repair shops that are near you. And there are lots of charities and social justice organizations, thrift stores, and so on. There are two in Miami, Finca Morada and Urban Oasis Project, that specifically work with food justice and collaborate with some other people to build food gardens. So they'll often take things like plant pots, like the black plastic plant pots that you don't need anymore, or tools and things like that that are harder to donate at a regular thrift store. And Zero Waste Miami also sometimes takes donations of odd things that a thrift store probably wouldn't take in order to distribute them to artists who are using them as art materials. There's nothing that I'm taking right now, but you can always check in to see what's being accepted at any given time. All right, so speaking of reusing unusual things, Rabbi Greengrass and I were talking before about her compost, which I was glad to hear about. And compost is basically just reusing your food scraps or recycling them in order to make healthy, nutritious soil. When I told my husband years ago that I wanted to start composting at home, he told me that composting is disgusting and that it would attract rats and flies and our neighbors would hate us, and that there was no way that we would do it. So I think that's what a lot of people think about when they think of composting, but it doesn't have to be that way. So this is what our compost looks like now. This is this is called a banana circle. It's a permaculture technique that is a closed loop system. Once it's constructed, the food scraps go in the middle, dried leaves and yard waste scraps go on top, other plants grow over it, and that slowly feeds the bananas and other plants around the perimeter. And this eliminates the need for chemical fertilizer, which is also a big, terribly polluting industry and requires massive amounts of phosphate mining, much of which is actually done in Florida. All right. You can also go to Zoo Miami to participate in their Zoo Do program, which is another way of, in a small way, closing the loop and also getting a really nice fertilizer for your landscape. All right, and I see that I'm going to need to speed up a little bit. Where you can really make one of the biggest impacts is by reducing what you use, how much you use of especially polluting and waste creating products. When it comes to energy production, you can, as we talked about before, look into solar. make home improvements and landscape changes. And in general, just reduce the amount of energy that you use and therefore create the demand for. These we went over a little bit earlier also. But I would add that it's also important, if you can, to advocate for policy change and for more investment in renewable energy and for improved public transit. All right, so this is the place where a lot of waste happens. As much as you can, avoid single-use plastics. Look into zero waste product swaps, which I'll go into a little bit later. Try to buy less and just buy a higher quality thing less often. Some of you may also be familiar with the idea of capsule wardrobes, which is a way of just having fewer clothes that you mix and match so that you need and use less. And I'm also going to talk a little bit later about other certifications you can look for so that the companies that you buy from are companies that are using sustainable practices. Also, when you buy things online, there's usually a little comment box where you can ask a question or make a request. Just take a minute to ask them to please use recyclable packaging instead of plastic packaging. To make an impact in the area of agriculture, again, reduce your intake of high carbon foods and support local, organic, and regenerative agriculture. Urban Oasis Project is wonderful for this. They not only source from local farmers, but they also in our off season bring in organic produce from elsewhere. And if you are buying your produce at farmers markets, you can also be buying not just local foods, but seasonal foods, which reduces the carbon emissions from transit. So greenwashing is something that is happening a lot as more and more people are interested in making more eco-friendly choices. It basically just means that a company says we're doing things sustainably, but they are not, and they don't really have any way to prove it, but they use it in their marketing to get you to buy the product anyway. All of these things can actually be sustainable, but companies that use these words on their packaging are not necessarily doing sustainable things. So again, with food, what you want to look for is if it's at a farmer's market, ask where it was grown, if it was actually grown locally. And you can also do a CSA subscription box, or even buy directly from a local farm, most of which are down in Homestead or the Redland. Look for USDA organic. Also, the biodynamic certification is less common here, but that's another really actually meaningful certification. And also the companies that are doing more for animal welfare are also generally doing more for the environment. So you look for the animal welfare approved, certified humane, or the GAP certification 4 or above. And of course, look for food that has as little plastic packaging as possible. Textiles are a huge source of waste and pollution. The most environmentally friendly fabrics are hemp, linen, organic linen, and then organic cotton also comes in the second category, or the synthetics if they are recycled. I'll also send out all of this information, so instead of just reading it off to you, you can refer to it later. And then there are certifications for all kinds of other products and materials as well, One of the big ones is FSC certified, which means that that the wood is from a sustainably managed forest. Also, when you're looking to have an impact on the environment, and if you're especially interested in the social justice aspect, look for certified B corporations, which means that their business model revolves around the idea of making a positive change. These are some of the specific products that I think are actually good, and most of them are not too hard to find these days. But you can also use even less packaging, less plastic, if you do bulk refills. There's a zero waste shop called Verde. They have a shop in Edgewater and one in Pinecrest. You can bring in your plastic bottle and then refill it with shampoo or detergent or whatever it is, so that you don't have to buy a whole other bottle. You can also buy online. Grove.co is a good resource. This is the address for Verde. These are some clothing company recommendations. And you can also look at the website Good On You, which does clothing company ratings when it comes to sustainability. It also does recommendations for shoes. Again, Good On You. And if you have kids, these are some of my favorite sources for sustainably made toys and dolls. You can get them online. You can also get them at some local places. These are some of the websites that I like for these brands and others. Okay, so then there are the zero waste swaps. Instead of buying disposable razors or even the plastic ones with the pop-off heads, you can get safety razors. Stainless steel, they unscrew, you can recycle the blades, and they last pretty much forever. Instead of a plastic toothbrush, you can buy a bamboo toothbrush, which if you have a compost, you can put it in the compost. When you're done, you do have to pull out the bristles. You can get silicone reusable bags. They're called stasher bags, and there are multiple brands that make those instead of buying box after box of Ziploc bags. Instead of a plastic sponge, you can buy a loofah, which actually grows here. It's a gourd, it's in the cucumber family, actually. And you can cut them down, you can buy them this way or this way. And not only do they replace your plastic sponge, but you can put them in the dishwasher or the washing machine. And some of these will last literally for 6 months. They can also be composted when you're done with them. I see that I'm running out of time. So if you are specifically interested in one of these other things, let me know. And again, I'll send out all this information again after this is over. So before I end, I want to just suggest some very specific companies and organizations that are here in South Florida that I think are doing a great job. And of course, if you're interested in more, there's zerowastemiami.com. So I will hand it back over to whoever is handling questions.
So there have been a few kind of questions in the chat about just if there's any sort of a smell when you do composting. I had a question about the coffee filters, can you use these cloth filters in like a coffee machine, or does it have to be pour over coffee? I don't drink coffee, I drink tea, but I could replace it for my husband. Yeah, so we'll start with those two.
All right, so the question about whether compost smells bad, only if you're not doing it right. And I find that the banana circle is one of the least smelly ways and easiest ways to do it right. As long as you're covering your food scraps with a little bit of soil or with enough leaf litter or whatever it is that you're putting on top, you're not going to get a smell. If you have a turning compost, as long as you turn it, as long as it gets enough air, and as long as you have the right balance of food waste and what are called browns, which is dried leaves, you can put cardboard in there. It's only when the balance is off that it starts to smell bad. And then for the coffee filters, you can use them in machines. You theoretically can use them in machines. I don't know of any that are designed for machines, but that's an interesting question, and I'll look into it. And for tea, you can also get reusable tea bags.
Oh, I use I don't use tea bags. I have like a metal thing that I scoop my tea. Michelle, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or do you want me to read it?
Hi. Oh, sorry. I just realized that sorry. Don't judge me. I'm eating Twizzlers for dinner. Sorry, it's been a day. So I stopped eating beef 20 years ago, and chicken more recently. How environmentally unfriendly is wild caught fish?
It depends. The industrial fishing operations are pretty terrible.
Right.
So the answer is it depends. If you can find fish that is local, right? I mean, the more you buy local and you buy from somebody who is a small fisherman who you know their name, and you know that they're not going out on an enormous boat with like cruise ship sized nets,
right,
then it's fine. And I would say,
there are certain types of fishes that tend to be like, I don't know, like a tuna and salmon, I imagine, is pretty industrial.
It usually, yes. I would say use that in moderation or minimally. As with everything else, the more local, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But wild caught is still better than farmed, correct?
Yes. I think that there are some people who would debate that for various reasons. And I think both sides make fair points, but definitely local small fishermen are better than farmed fish.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the problems with the wild caught fish is that they tend to like put out these long lines of fish, long lines of hook, and anything can get attached to it. Or they scoop up a lot of fish and anything can be scooped up in it. And they often end up killing, everything else that's scooped up or caught on the line. So they both have their bad points.
Right.
I wanna encourage people, as Carrie suggested, that like one of the best things we can do is to adjust what we eat. I married a vegetarian who is no longer a vegetarian, but he was a vegetarian like since he was 12 until we moved to Miami. And that didn't get me to stop eating meat. I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. My sister's third word was cow. Like we loved animals. That didn't get me to stop eating meat. Any of watching the videos of how cruel it was to animals didn't get me to stop eating meat. When I got cancer and was told that I should stop eating meat, I wouldn't stop eating meat. But I read this book, Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer, and he talked about the environmental impact of the meat industry. And it is just so much worse than I could have ever imagined. And it's worse than the other areas all combined. And that got me to stop eating meat, but I still couldn't do it all in one go. So I would suggest, if you are interested in like trying to reduce, like the first thing I did was join the Meatless Monday movement, which is just like 1 day a week to say like, I'm not doing it. And then I decided I was going to add Vegan Tuesday. And then as a family, we did like this meatless till 5, which is, you know, that you don't eat meat except for maybe for dinner. And then now I'm a pescatarian, but I only eat fish like twice a week. So like I'm still getting there. I think a lot of this, Carrie, this is so helpful. I think so we get intimidated by how big the problem is and feeling like either I have to do everything or nothing. So you've given us so many tools, and I think if we can all, you know, try and adapt, you know, just one, that would be amazing. And then once we get that going, then try and adapt another.
Right. I would also add that another good book is The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask if there were more questions.
I see in the comments, do you think school lunches could follow Meatless Monday? That would be wonderful. I think it would probably take pressure from parents.
Well, that is apparent. So we'll put some pressure together. We have a few members of our school's green committee who are on this, and
Oh, it was specifically asking about your school.
our school.
Yes, okay. And probably less pressure from parents necessary.
Judy?
Right, okay, so I see another comment. What happens in Dade County if the wrong items are put in recycling? It can jam the machines, and it can cause the entire load of recycling to be thrown out instead of recycled. There's actually a phenomenon called wish cycling, which is when, even though they say you can only put in certain things, you put in something else anyway, just hoping that it will get through somehow. And that does not work. It makes it worse. Well, any other questions? I don't think so. Well, thank you so much for listening. And please reach out if you have any more questions later.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Again, this is Carrie C. I'm like, I want to see your artwork now too. Do you have a website that we can look at?
Yes, I have a separate website for art. There's one behind me, actually. I use a lot of recycled and repurposed materials in my artwork also. But if you Google me, my website will come up.
And then also Zero Waste Miami.
Right.
There were questions about this slideshow. You said you were going to share with us some resources.
Yes. Anybody who has, if anybody has given you their email address and would like to receive a more comprehensive list of resources, I can send that to you, and then you can send that to them. Or you can contact me directly.
Thank you. And now our chat is filling up just with thank yous. I want to thank you so much, Carrie. I want to thank everyone who has been on the call and who's watching through the live stream. Thank you for being here. I know it's a tough week, but this is just so important. And hopefully in the new year, this will make it onto everyone's, resolution list
Yes.
that we'll all be taking steps toward being more sustainable and more thoughtful about our choices. So thank you all. I wish you a happy and a sweet new year.
Thank you, and likewise.